Hola, ¿qué tal? Y bienvenidos a Naranja Asteroide, tu jugo cósmico. Te saluda Mai. Bienvenidos a su espacio para aprender a navegar las corrientes cósmicas de manera más consciente. Ha llegado el momento de hablar de Saturno y Neptuno en Pisces. Saturno acá representa lo tangible, Neptuno y Pisces todo lo que no es tangible. Entonces, para poder entender a profundidad, he invitado a un experto en astrología evolutiva, Ari Moshe Wolfe. Nos va a hablar a fondo de qué onda con este tránsito. Como ustedes saben, estos dos planetas, Saturno y Neptuno, también se van a encontrar pronto. Vamos a hablar a fondo, vidas pasadas, karma, todas estas cuestiones. Y realmente este es un video que disfruté mucho porque en lo personal me cayeron muchos veintes. También nos cuenta un poco de su historia personal. Él creció en un ambiente judío ortodoxo y ahora es astrólogo. Entonces tiene una historia muy interesante. Vamos a analizar brevemente también, nos va a explicar cómo podemos navegar este tránsito dependiendo de dónde esté tu casa Piscis en tu carta natal. Vamos a ver todo desde una perspectiva muy distinta a lo que creo que casi todos hemos escuchado en las redes. Así que espero que se queden hasta el final y que lo disfruten mucho. Y para agregar subtítulos a este video, subtítulos en español, porque es un video en inglés, vamos a ir a nuestra pantalla aquí en YouTube y vamos a buscar la herramienta de configuración en el lado derecho abajo. Tiene que aparecer esta herramienta. Si están en su teléfono, hagan clic en el video y les aparece la barra de herramientas. Vamos aquí a activar los subtítulos. Aquí los he desactivado, acá los activo. Y para seleccionar el idioma, voy a hacer clic en configuración, voy a ir a subtítulos y voy a poner auto translate. Me va a pedir que elija el idioma, entonces yo voy a poner español o Spanish, dependiendo cómo tengan configurado su canal de YouTube. Voy a poner Spanish y me está indicando ya que YouTube está agregando subtítulos en español automáticamente. Hello, everyone. So we are here with Ari Moshe, and he's going to introduce us to a new approach to astrology, which is the evolutionary astrology approach. Ari, how are you?
Good. Nice to be here and great to meet you.
Thank you so much for sharing your time and your knowledge with all of us. First of all, I want to ask you, what exactly is evolutionary astrology?
Evolutionary astrology, it's a paradigm taught by Jeffrey Wolfe Green. The essence of it is looking at the natal chart as a way to understand the underlying purpose of the soul's incarnation. So the perspective is we're looking at this lifetime and everything in it, our body, all the personal circumstances of this life, and we recognize that the totality of our human experience exists for the purposes of our ongoing self-realization. And we don't look at anything as just random or insignificant. Everything reflects back to the soul, meaning who we are in our essence. When you take away the body, the ego construct, or personality construct, we're left with what we are. So we think of this life in a sense as like the next chapter of a long series of experiences. And we look at the chart to reveal essentially on one level, what are the existing karmic dynamics within the soul, meaning where did we leave off? When we die, we take nothing with us except for what's inside, right? The grievances, the unresolved desires, the attachments, the unmet ambitions. And this propels us to continue to create experience, to work through it all, to play it out. So we can say this life in a way is just designed for us to get to know ourselves. And so the natal chart will reveal what's the evolutionary intention, where did we leave off? And in this lifetime, what are we working through? So it's taking every facet of our life, everything without any exception, and pointing back to how does this serve our ongoing evolutionary intention and purpose? It's a very deep and penetrating kind of work that's just all about getting to the core of the matter.
So could we say that this astrological approach is more of a spiritual approach,
Yeah,
a soul, like how to work with our soul in this life and how to overcome those challenges, but from a soul kind of like spiritual realm? Is that how?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, the beautiful thing about astrology is that it can be used in all kinds of ways. And I think our understanding of the planetary positions will go as deep as our understanding of who we are.
Starting from there.
So if we think of ourselves as these timeless, infinite, powerful beings on a journey of self-remembering, then we can look at the chart as a way to understand what this journey is about.
Wow, amazing, amazing
So it
approach.
transcends any kind of like personality, like it speaks to personality in all those levels, but it goes deeper and it asks the question, why this personality? Why do I have these needs? Why does this bother me? Why does this attract me? It goes
Mhm.
underneath the surface. It is.
So Ari, I understand you're opening a new course about astrology from this perspective. Can you tell us more about it?
Absolutely. This is my third year teaching this program. We're actually beginning at the end of this month, and
Mm,
enrollment's open for the next month or so. The first few weeks are just very slow in getting oriented to the work. It's all about teaching this from the ground up. It's the heart and soul centered astrology training program. So we're beginning with the Essentials course, which is part one. The Essentials course is all about studying the evolutionary meaning of the signs, the houses, all of the planets. That's it. And then we spend a lot of time putting the planet in various house and sign combinations. So it's kind of like getting a very basic spiritual and philosophical ground in how to think about all the different components of the chart. People can enroll in just that course. A lot of people take that course. They don't want to become astrologers, but just the knowledge, the wisdom
claro.
is deep, right? And then part two is the chart interpretation course, which
Amazing.
begins in August.
Okay.
This is when we begin to put it all together and actually begin to interpret charts. So the training program, it's an astrology study, but it is also a spiritual study of our soul.
Of course,
It's
of
a
course.
deep, beautiful experience.
I'm sure. So obviously, I'm gonna leave all his details and the details for this course below in the description below this video. So if you wanna enroll, go ahead. This is a very unique perspective, a very special from what I understand, because we are also gonna work with our soul. Ari, is this astrology related to karmic past lives or stuff like that?
It
Or
is, yeah.
not at all? It
It
is.
is,
So
yeah.
you also look at your kind of like karmic mission, past lives.
Yeah. And when we speak about Saturn, Neptune, we'll come back to that because how we think about time is a very important part of this. But absolutely, we look at past life dynamics and what are the imprints that have brought us into this particular life? What are we working on?
Amazing. So guys, go ahead and check it out. It's going to be amazing. I'm sure of it. And also Ari is a very, very special teacher. He is very down to earth. I love his approach, the way he teaches. And so now talking about spiritual stuff, we're going to dive in with this very special Saturn Neptune alignment that we're going to have. But first of all, Ari, tell us a little bit what your comment is about Saturn entering Pisces, because from the comments I read in previous videos that I made about Saturn in Pisces, people seem to be a little bit scared about it.
Okay, so let's take a moment and just start with what is Saturn? I want to share my understanding of that planetary function.
Mm-hmm.
We know that Saturn corresponds to boundaries, parameters, times, limitations, right? We also hear the word that Saturn is the lord of karma, okay? The way that we'll think of Saturn is anything in our human experience that has definition, anything that is conditioned. And so for something to become conditioned, it has to grow slowly over a long period of time. Take our physical posture, for example, right? Or take a tree, right? So everything starts off almost as a thought, almost as a non-formed, inexpressed essence, and it's fragile and it's delicate and it has to be repeated and practiced. So on a deeper level, Saturn corresponds to our own conditioning. We all come into a society where there are certain social conditions. Saturn is society, your country, the borders that we put on the earth to say this is that country and that is that country, your race, the nations you come from, all that kind of stuff. And we all inherit a certain social conditioning that says, this is what's right, this is what's wrong, this is what's appropriate, right? And then we also have rules that are necessary to follow, like stop at a red light, go at a green light. So a part of the dynamic with Saturn is we're actually all learning to differentiate between rules and boundaries and limitations that are helpful and useful for functioning as a human being in this world versus how we've become conditioned to look at the world and to think of ourselves in ways that reflect patriarchal constructs that are all over the world. So Saturn for everyone, because we're all alive right now, reflects where we have all become conditioned by judgments, by roles and rules and projections that are unnatural to what we are. So when Saturn transits anywhere, we're looking at both of them. We can think of it as it's where we're learning to work with the parameters and limitations that are necessary at this time. And though we're becoming more responsible to show up in the ways that we need. And there's also a deconditioning process. Now, people don't think of Saturn as deconditioning. That's usually a Uranus type of archetype. The reason why Saturn corresponds to deconditioning is because we're bombarded with so many constructs. So there's a deep, deep, deep need with Saturn to become introspective and reflective and to cultivate a personal agency, self-relationship to one's own authority. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Am I doing it because I was told to do it? Why am I living the life that I'm living? The job, the family, the diet, the structural reality of my life. Am I trying to fit into an externalized notion of what's right? And this can be difficult. This Saturn work, and again, this is Saturn in our natal chart, this is Saturn in transit. Cultivating true mastery and actually building a structural reality Saturn that works, that can actually help and support our function and our evolutionary purpose in this life. To really do that means we have to go within and really be able to discern, why am I doing what I'm doing? Is this livable? Is this workable? So we might be familiar with depression as an archetype that corresponds to Saturn, right? Depression simply speaks to the structural reality of our life, doesn't resonate with who we are. And we're repressing, we're trying to force ourselves into something that doesn't align with who we are. And so this process of introspection is deeply, deeply important with Saturn, because on the other end of that is our capacity to trust ourselves and also to learn from those that have come before us, right? It depends on who we're looking towards as our guide. Like we can look towards the people that have also repressed a whole bunch, right? And decided lots of money and fame and wealth and stability is more important than happiness. We can use them as our role models and follow in their ways, right? We can also use other people that have become successful according to what we have come to identify as successful for ourselves. So this introduction, I can say, we can think of Saturn as ultimately pointing to, how do I define success? How we define success will then determine what we think is worth committing to and what we think is worth practicing and cultivating and conditioning and training. So we're all a disciple to something. Okay. That's Saturn in general. It's very important to understand this because when we look at Saturn in any placement, we're looking at what is the form that consciousness is conditioning itself with. Where are these lessons happening? Like, where are we developing a structural reality that works? And where are we deconditioning from all kinds of constructs and ideas that are? To introduce Saturn in Pisces, I want to take one more step back and just take a greater question and ask, what is time all about? What is the purpose of time? And this is a very important question, because a thing that happens with Saturn in all of our lives, we just assume that things are as they are. Like, yeah, I'm a man. It's like that. This is what do you mean? You got to eat food. You live in a society. You have to you have to work. You have to get a job and do these things. It's like, do you? Is that true? Like, is that true, or is it just like how we are currently conditioned to think?
Mhm.
So, Jeff Green once said a beautiful one-liner: most souls don't realize the extent to which they are conditioned. It's like you don't realize the world you're living in until you kind of separated from it and realize, oh yeah, that was a whole bunch of conditioning. But you look back at any era of society hundreds of years ago, the norms of what it means to be a human being have been different all the time. So recognizing that we just tend to like accept things as they are, we often fail to recognize what this life is really about. Right? It's almost as if we've come into this human experience and we've decided at some point that this is what we are. Like, I am this body, I am this gender, I am my job, I am my profession, I am the things that I'm really concerned about. So the way that I want to frame time is a vehicle, it's a template that we've created through which we can play out our experiences. The creation of time itself is only born from desire, meaning the fact that we're seeking to have experience, that we're looking for something seemingly outside of ourselves, itself creates human incarnation within time-space experience. In unity, in wholeness, in oneness, there is no time, because time implies separation. Time is always going to say that there's something in the past and there's something in the future. Eternity doesn't have that. Eternity is just this ever-present right now. So time itself, and we can say time and the parameters and the limitations that exist within time, because time and space are actually synonymous. So the manifestation of the body, where we perceive distance, right? You're all the way in Israel, I'm here in California, but we're experiencing connection in the way that we are. But the way that we perceive distance in space, distance in time, all of that is reflective of how we have each created a template of time and space for our ongoing evolutionary journey. So it doesn't exist in eternity. It's a learning purpose. When we graduate, it's kind of like going to high school. High school is a parameter, and time is organized a particular way when you're in school. If you study and you pass your grades, you'll graduate and you're done. You don't have to repeat it. But then you go on to a new but different organization of time-space experience. Everything in our life is like that, and life itself is like that. And A Course in Miracles, which is a big practice, something that I study, which is a big part of whatever I teach. It's so inspired by that work. It gives a definition of time. The purpose of time is to learn how to use time purposefully. When it is no longer needed for our learning, it will no longer exist. Right? So the purpose of time is to learn how to use time well. So to take this home, how are we using this lifetime? How are we using the duration of our human incarnation? What are we practicing? What are we conditioning? How are we disciplining ourselves? That's the purpose of time. Now, we bring Saturn into Pisces. It says all of the meaning that we've put on our life, I'm this, I'm that, this is my goal, all of that dissolves, and we're called to reorient and redevote time and the total structural reality of our life to meaning with a capital M, to that which has true meaning, to that which is greater than our own creation. There's a really beautiful book called Love Without End, And it talks about this idea that we love serving structure. We put structure over love. And, anytime that we allow ourselves to be stressed out or worried or fearful about anything, any condition in our life, it just points back down to where the order and the structure of our life and the control that we want is slipping by. And we forget that love, our connection to what we are, our attunement with the divine, right, is actually the most important thing. So we can think of the undoing of our unnecessary conditioning as learning to make structure in service to love, right?
Okay. Right.
Allowing structure to serve love. And when structure serves love, it just really takes us to the essence of things. There can be two experiences that happen with Saturn and Pisces. One, there can be a feeling of a loss of control. Like everything that we thought was important or meaningful seems to break down and fall apart. It can be incredibly disillusioning.
Mhm.
The other can be a total reorientation to a divine inspiration, where then our human experience is infused with meaning and purpose, where we find ourselves in relationship to something that doesn't exist within the constructs that we've established. And this really means forgiveness. I think the one word that I would use for Saturn in Pisces is forgiveness, because we can't take our judgments there. We can't take our absolute ideals about what things should be into love. Love doesn't know what's appropriate or not appropriate or what should or shouldn't be. And love never judges. Love never condemns. So where there is within our own conditioning, shame, fear, guilt, because shame is a big part of Saturn, right? Oh, I said that, or I did that, or I was late, or we can carry all of this shame that says, I'm a bad person, right? I have a friend that has a beautiful poster in his room. It says, there is no saint without a past and no sinner without a future. In the Judeo-Christian conditioning, we're so used to this idea of like, oh, you did something bad, you're a bad person, or I did something bad, I'm worthy of shame, I can never forgive myself, or shame on you, you don't deserve love. There's a very unforgiving norm. We actually love doing that. It's funny, we love hurting. It's a very oxymoronic way to think even. It's a very popular notion to look out and to feel valid in shaming other people, shaming ourselves, but it's completely unnatural. And it's very important that we recognize this is a part of our long-term Judeo-Christian conditioning, right? Where we look at things in terms of you're a sinner, you're a bad person. This is the right way, this is the wrong way. And so it's important that we really understand that there is in life only learning, right? There are just mistakes. And wrong really just means not right. And right just means in alignment with truth. And it resonates with existence. And we can feel it inside. That's what ethics are. That's what alignment with Saturn is. When we're wrong, it just means we made a mistake. We believed something that was untrue. So there's a lot of healing and forgiveness that's intended with Saturn in Pisces.
How can we navigate this? For example, in my channel, there are many people that are over 60 from what I see in the statistics.
Great.
Those people are very preconditioned. I think of my mom, I think of my dad, right? Which tools can they use in order to realign? Because they have some baggage, it can be heavy and it can be very hard to do this work. So what would you recommend here?
Great. I think for everyone, there's a tendency to say, the older you get, the more set in your ways you become. But that only says we've been repeating something over a long time and it becomes hardened and crystallized. So in the world, in our worldly perception, we tend to think that what's solid is strong, but what's invisible is stronger. But we need to practice. I think this is the seed of our practice. We need to practice allowing the thoughts we're not used to thinking to become more dominant in our awareness. And so I think for all of us, a little bit of willingness, right? Where do we feel judgment? Where do we feel shame? Where do we feel almost like a self-indignation? Things have to be this way. Or, I'm old and my body isn't what it could be anymore, and a giving up. So one of the things that can happen with Saturn and Pisces is all of the limitations that we thought were real, they just fall away. Right? This is where miracles can happen, because Saturn is like the typical order of time and space and things. And, like I hear some construction outside, and, you eat food for your body, and we have a schedule. But again, all of this is happening within this illusion. All of that, including our bodies, are happening within this illusion of time and space that we've created for our learning, for our awakening. So there can be these experiences where miracles come in, where the seeming realness of the typical schedule is lifted for a time. And things that don't make sense, that you couldn't imagine could happen. Right? It's like Jesus says, say to the mountain, move, and it will move. Right? There are these facets of human experience that we think have to always be the way that they are. But when love is taking control, anything could happen. Now, this can become a point of confusion, right? So let's say the example of like your body is achy and stiff, right? People get sick, people get old, people die. An issue with Saturn and Pisces is we can feel abandoned. And this maybe is where a lot of people fear, in your comments, people fear the fear, perhaps. Like it can feel like everything's falling apart, right? Like we've seen these like big collective, endemics during Saturn and Pisces, and historically, because Pisces is the collective, right? And Saturn is like any kind of judgment, and in a way that there's like everything comes up. It's like all these different pieces come up, and it can feel very scary. It can feel like losing control. It can feel like we're being oppressed by something much greater than ourselves. Just imagine that. Imagine Saturn and Pisces. You're a citizen in a country, and you have no control. You can't walk outside showing your face if you're a woman in some places, right? You can't say certain things, right? You can feel very small, and that's a common dynamic with Pisces. We can feel very, very small, and that like nothing we do matters, like throwing a cup of water in the ocean. Nothing matters. We can't make a change. We can't make an impact. So there can be a deep existential vulnerability with Saturn and Pisces, right? All the rules of the control, right? If I do something, I'm going to get put in jail. Saturn, I'm going to, all of these things can happen, right? Or I'm in this body. I have all these physical diseases, physical sickness, all these struggles. Or financially, I have 10 children. I'm not making enough money. I'm working really hard, and I'm stressed out, and my wife is angry at me, and my job, my boss is just pushing me. Anything in our life can be experienced as a heavy oppressive force that we have no control over. That sensation can be incredibly depressing. And the dark side of Saturn and Pisces is a sort of giving up hope, giving up faith. But we have to really understand what the deeper spiritual purpose is in this, right? When we're giving up hope, when we're giving up faith, it's because we've really begun to see that the limitations of our life are actually enslaving us. Heavier than love. Like that form and structure has replaced love. And so it points to our allegiance, where our attention really is. So there can be a pivot, right? It's like there's no answer. That's the problem. It's like there's no, how do you get out of it? You can't. Right? With your own thinking, on your own, in the existing state of feeling burdened, there is no answer. And that can feel very depressing. the solution has to come from outside of that dilemma. The solution has to come in a shift in allegiance, right? In recognizing it is not God's will to think of it that way. It is not the will of love for me to suffer. And so I must got something wrong in my thinking. I must not be understanding the purpose of this life. And this doesn't mean suddenly your body is going to change, or your government, your country, you're going to get a plane ticket out of an oppressive regime. But just starting with, if I identify my life with this heaviness, with this burden, I'm becoming very materialistic. So Pisces Saturn says, drop the materialism. Don't think that you're in jail here. Turn towards something deeper beyond the physical. And look for greater meaning and greater purpose. And what it always does is it says, spirit, life, love, truth can use our circumstances for healing. There are so many ways that life can reorganize itself, and it's important that we understand that we can't control what happens. It's like there's a teaching in the Course in Miracles. Miracles are involuntary. They're consequences of love. And so our work is reconnecting and healing whatever we have in the way between us and love. Whatever's keeping us between loving seeing, loving perception. Then spirit takes over, right, and uses our life for holy healing purposes. I can share this with you. Thankfully, this is fun. Kedusha, lekadesh. Okay.
Lekadesh.
You know, the word for holiness, lekadesh, also means to discern, to differentiate. Like that's Shabbat is like that, right? Like Shabbat happens on a certain day, but you also have to bring it in, right?
Yes.
You can begin Shabbat earlier, and some people say you can end Shabbat on Tuesday.
Yeah, or some people don't do it at all, or some people do half of it.
Right. But like, you know, the ancient teachings on Shabbat being this idea of it's brought in when we decide, now I'm beginning Shabbat. And I love taking that idea and applying it in my life. I am not a traditional observer of Shabbat, but I think about that idea of what does it mean to designate the sacred right now. I think Shabbat is Saturn and Pisces in the truest sense, right? Its structure is resting. So Saturn and Pisces can really bring up a profound duality between the mundane and the holy. The mundane and the holy. You know, when we realize the purpose of life is not for everything to work out the way we want it to work out in our mind, we get to come back to the question, like, what's the purpose of the body? What's the purpose of my life? What's the purpose of making money? We love asking questions about our life, but we often fail to ask the question, why do I even need this? The profundity in recognizing that being mundane and like empty and meaningless and like depressed and sort of meaning and holiness and purpose, like the duality between the two, it can switch in a moment. And this is very powerful with Saturn in Pisces. It just takes our willingness to meet our judgments and to look differently, to think differently. And, you know, I'll close this piece with saying surrender is a big part of this. We have to surrender to almost like Saturn being the boss, the rules, like the divine law, right? Not the world that we see, not the things that we think have a hold on us. It's very common where we'll find ourselves, and I mentioned this in a recent 12th house interview, but just the metaphor of Saturn and Pisces does very strongly speak to the idea of a jail, right? And what's happening in a jail, it seems like your freedom is limited. It's another time-space experience, really. It's kind of no different than any other time-space experience, just a unique form of it. It seems like our freedom is limited, and we can all identify in our own lives where we feel like we're in jail. Like, where do we see ourselves as stuck, limited, confined? And thus, where are we internalizing a sense of guilt and shame and punishment? We can't take that to God. Like, these things don't fit in with the truth. So the movement from like empty boredom, mundanity into holiness is devotion. It's a sincere willingness to see differently and look at a different way, and to redevote our life to something greater than our own thinking. And remember that Saturn is discipline. We can look at Saturn in the chart at some placement, some houses.
Mhm.
It's discipline. So wherever Saturn in Pisces is in our chart, this is going to speak to where the spiritual discipline is. You know, Saturn in Pisces says so much about prayer, but we get confused about prayer. And then
Mhm.
we're disappointed because it doesn't work. Right?
Right.
Prayer is, help me, I am suffering. I have this problem and this problem and this problem. Please fix it for me. And it doesn't work. That never works. Because it's basically saying, here, my problems are real.
Mhm.
Go and it's like asking God to fix an illusion. You can't. What we can do is bring our illusions to God. I'm suffering. I'm having problems. I'm right. Teach me. Show me a different way of looking at. Take these burdens from my hands and use my life. Use me. Use the things in my life. Use everything that I think I see as so painful and heavy. Use it according to your will. Teach me. Correct me. So it's like the prayer itself opens up our heart, softens us, and makes us available to live more lightly. And it allows something greater than our own thinking to take control over our own life. So it's like all these different beautiful concepts, prayer, study, turning towards God, turning towards love. It can so easily be confused when it's associated with a very particular condition. And so, coming back to my story, I was really hoping that the result of all this work would be a particular conclusion. And it didn't happen. It was so hard. It was so hard. And I had to face immense disappointment in Saturn. There's an experience where I was a Roet Zone. I was a shepherd in where the Judean desert and the Judean hills kind of meet each other. And
Mhm.
um, during that time, there was an earthquake. And I was wearing a kippah, yarmulke, every day. I wasn't like praying every day with the tefillin and doing all the traditions like I used to. I
Mhm.
was already a little bit away from that. This is
Mhm.
when I was like 19 or 20.
Mhm.
And I was spending 8 months in Israel. And there was an earthquake. And I was
Oh.
with these goats. And I saw, and I, startled myself. And I thought one of the goats was like, one of the male goats was attacking me. But it was just an earthquake. And I noticed that this one goat was eating grass at the edge of a cliff. There are a lot
Mhm.
of cliffs there. And I just had this deep appreciation in that moment that this goat wasn't afraid. Like, this goat had no thought, oh, that was an earthquake. I almost lost my balance. Like, this goat was living in the present moment, eating grass, maybe like shaken for a moment, and then eating grass again. And there is something about that just sort of like brought forth the obviousness of all the things that I was trying to do and how it was unnecessary. And I took my yarmulke off. And it wasn't like an act of rebellion. It was an act of realizing I don't need this. It's not necessary.
Mhm.
There's a sort of simplification that I was really drawn to, deeply drawn to, and still deeply drawn to. And that time I went to Jerusalem and I saw a rabbinical leader that I knew in the States
Mhm.
who was in Israel at that time. And he says, Ari, you're not wearing a kippah. And I said, I know. And he says something like, okay, you've made your choice, or sorry to hear that. Something like disappointing.
Mhm.
And I felt like the ache in my heart, this leader that I looked up to, people that, authorities, Saturn, leaders, rabbinical authorities, anyone in our life can fit that role. And I had to just allow that and realize only I could judge myself, right? I have to forgive that. I have to forgive him. I have to forgive myself and come back to who I am right now has to be okay. So again, like, forgiveness is such an important part of Saturn and Pisces. Otherwise, we'll find ourselves constantly trying to hold on to something or conforming or judging, and to really think we're bound by our suffering to every. And I say this humbly because I'm on this journey too.
Mhm.
But I'm learning that to every problem, every tension, everything that feels so hard, every wrong that we've done, right? We've done horrible things. We all have. And horrible things have been done to us. And
Mhm.
I think it's really common to hold on to so much grief based on what we've done or what has been done to us. For every single one of those, there is another way of thinking.
When you were talking about your story, also about how you say unconditional love, that we forget
Yeah.
because we were taught to like, unconditional love for my daughter, for my father, but what about unconditional love for myself? Like, I think we forget that often, and maybe it's a
Hmm.
good way to start with Saturn in Pisces. I don't know, what do you think?
Absolutely. It's so
Mm.
important. Unconditional love for ourselves, which means like our inner dialogue is kind.
Uh-huh.
It's kind, like there's a tendency with Saturn to project judgment on the external world, to think other people are judging us, but we're actually dissociating from our own judgment of ourselves. You'll find that with people with a lot of Capricorn or strong Saturn, there's often a very deep sensitivity to being judged. But really, they are judging themselves. It's happening from within us. And so to be able to recognize, oh, I have this unprocessed shame and judgment and undeserving, and if we don't catch that within ourselves, we're going to feel constantly sensitive to how the world is judging us. Until we actually notice our own judgment and forgive ourselves, it's like a loving parent deciding to be loving and kind to their child. Until we give that to ourselves, we're going to constantly feel like the world outside is hurting us and judging us.
So, Ari, can we look at some of those Saturn positions in the chart so we can, get some more insights? Which
Great.
ones do you want to share with us?
Sure. Give me a random house and let's drop into it.
Okay, so people are saying, well, some astrologers are saying that this is the year of relationships for some reason. I think the
Right.
nodes probably. So
Oh, yeah.
Saturn in the seventh
Okay.
house.
Wonderful. Okay. So this is a great thing to analyze. One thing that I teach when looking at these positions is to think of the archetypes.
Mhm.
So the seventh house and the Libra archetype naturally squares the Saturn Capricorn 10th house archetype. So when we put Saturn in Libra, or Saturn in the seventh house, we're inherently looking at all of the social constructs and roles and judgments that relate to how to be in relationship. Okay. This is gender roles. This is how you're supposed to behave. This is how you're supposed to behave. Um, People pleasing, codependencies, all the ways in which we form relationship as a way to sort of crystallize conditioned thought patterns and get stuck with each other in that way. Saturn in Pisces in the seventh house says the purpose of every relationship, it doesn't matter whether it's like someone you just met or like your husband of 30 years, the purpose of every relationship is forgiveness, is the return to love. And we're going to have to face the conditions to love. The conditions to love says, I will feel good as long as, let's say, I can be your savior, right? I'm always the one to hold you when you feel sad and make you feel good and cheer you up. And as long as I play that role and as long as you need me, we're good, right? I'm going to feel good in this relationship, as long as you aren't interested in anyone else, right?
Oh
You
my
don't want to
God.
be with anyone else. You only want to be with me, and then I can love you.
All this
uh,
yeah, of course.
that's not
Wow.
love, you know? And this can feel scary, right? I'm not saying, thus you have to fill in the blank. Really, I don't know what you have to do. I don't know anything. That's the point. Neither does any of us, right? We don't know what love does. So Saturn is basically wanting us to remember. One of my first teachers, Adam Gainsbourg, said about Saturn. Saturn strengthens anything that it touches. So wherever Saturn's moving, and as well as natally, it's where we get to become stronger. So here, Saturn is getting stronger in loving one another. And we can be delusional about love, right? So it's strengthening our embodiment of unconditional love. And where there's martyrdom or expectations, we can be in a relationship and expect people to be a certain way, and then they aren't, and we're disillusioned. Saturn in Pisces in the 7th house says, you had an expectation. You associated love with a condition. That's where your suffering came from. So now you got to recalibrate all of that and let it all go.
Wow.
And it might be like, wow, I never actually knew you. So divine listening. Saturn in Pisces in the 7th house is a learning, strengthening our capacity to listen. What does listening mean here? Without judgment. And then it's listening to what wants to be. The wisdom of the 7th house is balance is a dynamic exploration. It's listening inside, listening outside. And there's a way of being that supports for growth and healing and blossoming for each individual in all relationships. But when we have judgments and unnoted, uncommunicated expectations and projections, we don't really listen and we don't come into balance. So divine harmony and holy union, holy relationship. But a lot of souls will have to, this is true. It's like Saturn's aspecting your Venus while it's in Pisces, same thing. A lot of souls will have to let go of the fairy tale. There's so much meaning put on relationships and finding the right person, finding the soulmate or the twin flame or whatever that is, right?
Yeah.
And Saturn says every relationship, every person is a reflection of the same divine. And we can love who we're with as things are and surrender our expectations and our beliefs, or we can try to make life conform to our fairy tale version of what we think things need to be, but we'll actually suffer and we'll never see. Massive disappointment is what could happen here. Massive healing and forgiveness and beauty and joy is also what can happen here.
Wow, amazing, fascinating. What about Saturn in the 2nd house, which is like a material house?
Okay, great. So when we put Saturn, let's just work with Saturn first. Saturn in the 2nd house obviously speaks to becoming very concentrated on what are the resources that I need to survive. Okay, we can become overly materialistic and fearful about money and survival, right? Where we begin to think of life in terms of, I have to work very hard to survive, or I'm always struggling to make ends meet, or I'm afraid of giving, I'm afraid of losing, right? There can be a learning with Saturn in the 2nd house of being responsible with our resources, managing them thoughtfully in a responsible way. So learning how to not indulge or be irresponsible with our resources, with our sexual energy as well. Procreation is 2nd house. So you put Pisces there. It's a very interesting combination because we're looking at the formless, Pisces, infinite, which is there's no end to life, and then resources. So from one point of view, Saturn in Pisces in the 2nd house says your abundance, your resources can incredibly expand and increase beyond your dreams, right? Because we're looking at infinity manifesting in the realm of survival. So there's no limitation to you getting your needs met and you surviving other than the judgments and constructs and beliefs that we have around it. So Saturn in Pisces in the 2nd house on the one extreme can be extreme poverty. Suddenly it's everything is failing you. You can't make enough money, you're burdened, things are heavy, you don't have the resources that you need, right? There could also be an indiscriminate issue where sexually there's an indiscriminate behavior, right? Sexuality, 2nd house, pleasure, Pisces, Saturn. Sure, I'll share my sexuality with anyone, and then you're transmitting diseases. And then there are these limitations that you're experiencing in the physical body, in the physical realm. Anything that affects our sense of self-value, our self-esteem. So we can feel like life is betraying us. We can feel like I'm not being supported. I'm not being held and loved and nourished in the ways that I need. Now, the other end of that is being able to ask the question, what is the body for? What is money for? What is, working to get a job for? Why am I here? So it's infusing our life with meaning. And the word that I would want to use for this signature is bringing grace and beauty back into the body, back into our life, because the highest expression of Pisces in the second house is where the body is, where we embody the quality of infinite beauty and grace. You can think of the second house is like shelter, and Pisces is love. So wherever we go, we can feel the embodiment of spirit. And when we're feeling the embodiment of spirit, is there any such thing as poverty? Is there any such thing as not having what we need? So you can be poor and on the street, but empty, not convoluted with a lot of material concerns, right? Sensual pleasures, monetary concerns. You can be clear and have very little money, but be full of God.
Wow,
And
beautiful.
in that state, you're giving so much, right? You will feel yourself to have a lot. And then what you give, you get. So it's transcending the appearances of having or not having, and redevoting our physical existence to meaning, redevoting our physical existence to something greater than just pure survival, right? And so you can be very wealthy and totally depressed. It's like Pisces, Saturn,
Yeah,
the second
true.
house. It's like a sandcastle. There's no meaning. It's just like, or another example, we can find ourselves in a place where we give up on trying to survive, and we decide to follow our inspiration and to really connect with the seat of our spiritual devotion. I often think of the second house as very Taoist, right? It's grounded, it's simple. A healthy second house expression doesn't want a lot of things that it doesn't love. It's like Marie Kondo. Does it spark joy or not? You want your life to reflect the spaciousness of what's inside. And so we can come into a choice to just simplify and devote our life to the sacred. And we can find ourselves suddenly making money, playing music, making art, selling our art, writing poetry, right? And again, it's however we can devote meaning and purpose to our life with love is where we're going to find abundance. And it's no one's purpose to suffer and to not have what you need. The purpose, however, the point is, don't associate that with material object. If there's a need for $100,000 in your bank account, then that is what you will get. That's the point. What we need is what's given. But it's healing and transcending all of the judgments. And one more piece I'll share is there can be so much shame with Saturn in Pisces in the second house. Shame around one's sexuality, shame around pleasure, shame around having money, right? So for a lot of souls, Saturn and Pisces in the second house can be a monk that's suddenly given the curriculum to learn how to see spirituality in making millions of dollars, right? It's like anywhere that we've drawn the line and said, God can't be here, whether it's suddenly becoming rich or letting go of some of our object focus, whatever it means for us, like life's asking us to feel good and not reject anything, and to really allow our physical existence to be embodiment of love, of meaning, of spirit. So Saturn and Pisces in the second house can, again, the polarity can feel incredibly depressing and hard, or just like bliss. Bliss is the word that I would use.
Somebody was asking me, if I have Saturn in the 11th house, the house of dreams and long-term goals, does it mean that they won't come to materialize? Does it mean that, because people tend to put labels onto the planets, Saturn restriction, no, house dreams, oh, my dreams won't come true, for example?
The answer to that is we have to work at it. So Saturn is practice, it's discipline, it's structure, but we can work at many things. We can work at an illusion, we can work at a fantasy and actually not train our minds. So we're always working on whatever we're repeating. We can work on wishful thinking. Wishful thinking will train our minds to be a wishful thinker, but it's not going to get us anywhere. We can train our minds to think more intelligently and more clearly. In the 11th house, we're seeing that the entire world is a hologram for the diverse ecosystem that lives inside each one of us. It's a fractal reality. So we become very external focused on this utopian world. I want to live in this society or this dream or this community. But it's actually, how are we thinking? Are we vibrating in resonance, in alignment with that? So it's really becoming a master of our own thinking. That's what I would say to that.
I wanted to tell the audience that in case they don't know, you have a Jewish background. We were talking about this before actually recording the video.
Should I speak to my Orthodox background?
Yes, please tell us. I was very thrilled when I read that in one of your emails, I think. Please tell us, how did astrology find you, and how, like, why?
So I mean, I was born a seeker. Every soul comes into this life as in their nature, right? So just, I am what I am. But I grew up in a family that became Orthodox and religious, and I went to a very religious upbringing, school for many years. In high school, and when we would study Talmud, every once in a while there were like sort of more Kabbalistic and mystical references. Sometimes the Agadot were there, or just like these different stories that would bring out like more mystical elements. And I was like always so interested in. And whenever astrology was mentioned, because it's there, it's referenced, but I was never allowed to study it. So I was a part of me, but I always knew astrology was real. I intuitively knew that. I just did. So the part of me that wants to know, what is this life about? Like, what's going on here, after high school, and I went through my whole disillusionment process with spirituality and God and religion, and it really just was a big process for me around my nodal return at 18 or so. I began studying, and actually the first place that I went, because I was Orthodox, I wanted to know what the law was around studying astrology. So I read Rambam, Maimonides, Mishneh Torah, just to like hear a little bit about his view on astrology. It wasn't super encouraging. It's like there are certain ways you could use it. You have to study with a teacher. It's like, where can I find a Jewish astrology teacher? YouTube wasn't even around back then. I don't even know where to find it. And I've later found that there are there's a lot out there in Judaism with astrology, and even Ezra, who I studied as an Orthodox Jew, was also an astrologer. So that's how it got started. As I just began studying and practicing and going more deeply, the EA lineage found me. I found it. We've kind of found each other, and that was destiny. And
you went through that Saturnian Piscean process of how was that for you?
Hard.
How do you feel, Pel? How do you feel?
It was hard. I think Saturn and Pisces, or you can say Saturn moving through the 12th house, even, you can say, for a person, right? The disillusionment is hard because it can feel like everything's coming to an end and there's no ground on the other end. So culture, religion, Saturn, right? The world that you're a part of is your Saturn. Your belief systems, just to clarify, is Jupiter, but the structural reality of your life, Saturn. So, we had community, Shabbat, the traditions, the prayers, the rituals. I was a youth leader. I would travel the world, not travel the country, doing movements, teaching, doing events with kids with special needs, including them in the Orthodox community. I went to Israel for 4 years, studying 3 years. 2 years of those were studying Torah, It was my whole world. And leaving high school, I was actually going to go to Israel to study in a yeshiva, a very, very religious yeshiva. And my intention was to get all of the answers to all of my questions. And I wanted to ask, Rashi says this, but can I argue with Rashi? This, he's a Pirush, he's a commentator on the Torah, and everyone respects whatever he says. I wanted to like bring out my questions, like what is the authority of the rabbis? What if can I do it this way? Or
Oh my God.
I wanted so badly to conclude with Judaism is the right path for me. These beliefs are the right way, and I don't have to feel like I don't belong. When I was in high school, I would study Torah with one of my high school teachers, and the answer to all of my questions was study more Torah.
Oh my God.
And it's beautiful because truth is one of those things where it's very easy to distort it and get it confused.
Change the meaning, no?
Yeah. So it's like there's something very beautiful about like study more Torah. Like there's something I resonate with in that, right? It's like the essence of what that is like keep on going within, right? Like real, like in the truest sense, study Torah. Torah is the guide. Where's the guide? Inside. Like if the true essence of that is keep on going within, which means like keep on looking at your relationship to the truth. Like look deeper. Even pray. If we really understand prayer is like a relationship to the truth that we're seeking to correct our own thinking and to inspire and guide us, but then these things can become confused. It's like study these particular religious dogmatic teachings and conform to it, or pray to God and ask for help. Like all these different beautiful concepts, prayer, study, turning towards God, turning towards love. It can so easily be confused when it's associated with a very particular condition. And so, coming back to my story, I was really hoping that the result of all this work would be a particular conclusion, and it didn't happen, right? I have to forgive that. I have to forgive him. I have to forgive myself and come back to who I am right now has to be okay. So again, like forgiveness is such an important part.
Beautiful, Ari. Thank you so much. So if you want more of Ari, first of all, or if you want to learn astrology from an evolutionary astrology perspective with Ari, just click on the link below.
Cool.
So Ari, thank you so much for your time. I really hope to have you soon again. It was a real pleasure, and I hope you get as many students as you could possibly handle. So
thank you so much, May. What a joy to share this time.
We are young, and green.